thank you. I have to tell you, I was shocked to find out that so many people were going to come out to hear about this topic this morning. But then I got here and found out that they have Krispy Kreme, and it all finally clicked in. I first became interested in the topic when I got married. Why, you may ask? When I got married, our daughters were 10 and 13, so I kind of skipped the whole baby and adolescent stage and went straight for the teenagerhood. And if you want to know about problems with authority, get involved with teenagers. And so I started to kind of realize, because I'd gone from this bachelor who really didn't think about deep thoughts very much, to suddenly I was in this position of actually in charge of teenagers who didn't necessarily understand the whole authority thing, and I realized I didn't either. And so I spent a bit of time kind of trying to learn about that. And of course then I got into management at Intel, and that presented its own level of authority challenges. And so over the years I've gotten interested in this topic, and I actually ended up doing a short-term missions trip out to Thailand and spent about 2 weeks teaching on this topic at the Bible college there. And so I've spent a bit of time thinking about it, and hopefully as I share my views with you this morning, I'll be able to give you some insights that are valuable. The issue of authority has been something kind of top on mind for a while, and I wanted to just get a sense of the audience here. So we have these generations in the U.S. right now, and it really is just a U.S. thing, but that's where we are. We have what we call the baby boomer generation, the Gen X generation, and the Gen Y generation. I want to get a feeling for who we have here. So I'm not asking your age. I just want to see a hand. Baby boomers were born between the year 1946 and 1964. Gen X was born between 1965 and 1977. And Gen Y is anybody born after the years 1977, 78 and beyond. So how many baby boomers do we have in the audience? Okay. How many Gen X? And how many Gen Y? All right, we got some. For you baby boomers, you may remember back in, I don't know, maybe it was late 60s, maybe it was early 70s. It's all kind of a haze, mainly because I'm too old to remember these days. But you may remember that there was a bumper sticker that came out, and that bumper sticker was a 2-word imperative. And it spoke for our generation more than just about any other bumper sticker could, right? And it was called Question Authority. And as baby boomers, we know the right response to question authority. Who says? Right? We know that because we created that. Well, then came along Gen X, and Gen X kind of has their own idea with authority, and that is to mistrust it, and in some cases even hold it in contempt, because Gen Xers are their own authority. And then there's Gen Y, who spend probably too much time playing video games to think about authority, but when they do, it has to do with the gatekeeper and whether or not they have enough weapons to kill him. So it's a whole different story. Part of why this is such a controversial topic at times is because we've seen it become a problem in our society in so many different ways. We have children who tend to have a problem with authority. Now, it may be because I just spend more time with children these days, although I don't think so. I think it's because I've actually noticed a little bit of a trend here, and that is over the last, I won't tell you how old I am, but the years of my life, I have noticed that the more children I meet, the more I find children who are having a problem with authority. And that problem has changed over the years. It used to just be kind of a rebellion against authority. Now it's just an outright disregard, just ignore authority because it doesn't have any impact in their life. Now that's not all children, of course, and I'll talk a little bit about why. Some children are different than others, but I've seen that happen, and I believe this is a trend going on. I spent a little time trying to find some statistics on this, and it's not something people study much. And so I've actually debated whether I want to go ask a few questions myself. At work, when I became a manager at Intel, I started to realize that you know, this isn't that easy. People just aren't respecting my position of authority. Why not? I tell them to do something. Why aren't they doing it? I'm the one in authority. And so I started thinking, well, gee, that's not working very well. They have a problem with authority. Have you noticed that the press and the media these days seem to make a sport out of discrediting people in authority? Have you seen that? The Enron scandal, the Arthur Anderson scandal, Martha Stewart, Bill Clinton. Who else? I talked about a few of these. The Catholic Church, who obviously have a few instances of abuse of authority. George W. Bush and some of the challenges there. It really seems like this has become one of those extreme sports. Let's go really focus on this and see how many politicians and how many members in authority we can discredit this week. It's really become a sport. It's something that is, it gains attention, it gains ratings because it's something people want to watch. They want to watch people in authority fall. The prevailing Gen X attitude tends to be contempt. And I've seen this in a lot of ways. There's a young man, a Gen Xer, who wrote this book called Willie's Shorts. And his name is Willie Schaffer. And I just wanted to read you something because I thought this was a very good example of what many Gen Xers think about authority. At one time after her reading of the Gaffer's Shorts, my older sister told me I have a problem with authority. I insisted that her charge is simply not true. It's the petty little people who try to have authority over me I have a problem with. I have developed an absolute and abiding contempt for people who take advantage of power to cheat, steal, or just enjoy jerking folks around. Most corporate executives and high government officials do that. I have contempt for the people who gravitate to positions for the purpose of exploiting them in some way. Shabby little people, clerks, claims adjusters, tax examiners, bullies of various persuasions, judges, prosecutors, and most of all, managers and politicians. Well, that gets quite a few of them. And that is a prevailing attitude that I have seen and read that a lot of the Gen Xers have. Why is this such a problem? After all, authority is necessary. Can you imagine a company without an authority structure? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to give you our business update meeting. Why is he talking? We didn't vote him in. Can you imagine an army without an authority structure? Men, take that hill. I don't think so. What do you mean you don't think so? Well, that's a steep hill, and besides, they're going to shoot at me up there. Well, that's our job. Take that hill. I think we should call a committee and talk about it and maybe have a vote. There might be an easier way to get those people to just leave that hill. Wouldn't work. You couldn't do it. Authority structures are necessary, and the other thing is they're natural. People want them. Roles and responsibilities is probably, as a manager at Intel, one of the most often held questions that I get. Who's in charge? Who's in charge of this? Who's going to make this decision? Who is the person in authority for this topic? And I spend more of my time as an Intel manager trying to deal with the roles and responsibilities than getting work done. Now at Intel, that's part of the management job. And that's okay. But it is a big issue. People want to know. They need to have that in their lives. The people of Israel, if you remember, back in the early days when it was just judges, decided that they wanted a different structure of authority because they didn't like the one that was set up. In fact, they didn't feel it was much of a structure of authority, and so they asked for kings. And they got them. They went outside the authority structure, said, okay, God, I want my own authority structure. I want the one that the world says is the right one. They got kings, and we saw what happened after that. It didn't do too well for them. But they wanted an authority structure. And the other thing is, it's created. Now, you may not believe that, but if you do have a faith that you believe in God, which I do, and his son Jesus, then you have to believe that it's created because when Jesus came to earth, he followed an authority structure. He said many, many times, "My Father has given me authority," and then he would talk about what he had authority over. And then he also understood how to give authority. So you see it in nature. Sometimes authority struggles in nature are pretty brutal. Luckily, we don't do that these days as humans. But you know, when an elk wants to be the head elk, it's pretty brutal to get that authority of that particular herd. We like to think more civilized ways of deciding who's in charge, but it is a natural structure. So why do we have such a problem with this stuff? Why is it that authority is such a problem? If it's really natural, and if it is something that gives people what they want, why do we have such a problem with it? And I'm going to give you 5 suggestions of why I think that people have a problem with it. The first one is pride. When somebody is an authority over you, and you tell yourself, "I could do it better than he or she is doing it," or he or she is doing it in a way that is not right, then pride can step up and say, "You know, I don't think I have to necessarily listen to this person who I'm better than anyway. So I'll just kind of do it my way." There's actually an example, the earliest example that I have been able to find that's been recorded in history of an authority struggle. And it was all about pride. And it took place in heaven, and it was an angel by the name of Lucifer. And he decided that he could be in charge. He decided that he could rise above God. And it didn't work out so well for him. In fact, he is now the one we call Satan, because he had a major fall, because he decided in his pride of who he was and what he could be, that he could be greater than God. And that wasn't a very good result. It was, however, a type of what happens when we start using our pride, giving into our pride, to think we can be better than those in authority over us. The second reason that I have found is that we have this perception that authority equals tyranny. We have it for a very good reason. We've seen it in many cases. We've seen people in authority get somewhat tyrannical, and in many cases more than just somewhat. And consequently, we get this sense that if I give in to this, if I just acknowledge that this person who has authority is somebody I have to listen to, then I lose my freedom. And losing freedom is never a fun thing. And in fact, when we lose freedom, then we have this level of insecurity which says, "Oh, well, now I'm going to be under somebody else's control. Therefore, I don't want that to happen because they may ask me to do something I don't like, or it could even make it dangerous for me." And so there's that sense going on that authority equals tyranny. It equals a taking away of my control, which nobody likes. There's a third suggestion I want to give you, and that is a lot of people have been burned by people who are in authority. And that can happen either directly or it can happen vicariously. I may have personally been burned by somebody in authority, or I may have friends who have been burned by somebody in authority, or I may have heard stories on the news about somebody who is in authority. But quite often, we find that somebody who is really struggling with this issue has been burned by it somewhere along the line, either directly or vicariously. There's a fourth reason I want to give you. We don't have very many good role models in this space. In fact, our role models in many cases, at least the ones that we have a lot of visibility to, are sometimes very much different from what we would consider to be a role model of how to exercise authority. A couple of obvious cases: Saddam Hussein, maybe the dear leader of Korea, Kim Jong-il, who we would all recognize as clear abusers of authority. But there's a couple of more subtle examples of what I would consider to be bad role models. Deadbeat dads. These are men who have exercised their authority over the procreation process to make some woman pregnant and then boogied to let her take care of the baby. What does that do? Every other woman who sees that suddenly starts having a confidence problem in men. Children who see that start having a confidence problem in fathers. and it may be just a little bit of one. But it starts to erode that whole confidence, willingness to pay attention to and submit to authority. I'll give you the final reason, and this is, in my mind, is the real ultimate cause, the real ultimate root cause behind why authority is such a problem. Those who hold positions of authority are people. And people are not perfect. Sometimes they're really not perfect. Sometimes they're only a little bit not perfect, but they're not perfect. Nobody's perfect. If you're sitting there in your chair and you think you are, I got bad news for you. And that, I think, is the root cause for why we all have such a problem with authority, or so many people have such a problem with authority. We ultimately have to buy into an authority structure that is run by people. So, what is authority all about? Because I found that authority is something that can be misunderstood. So I want to just say a couple of words about the authority model. What I think of as the authority model. First of all, authority quite often is misunderstood as power. Authority itself is not power. Authority has a different definition. Let me give you a working definition for what I would say authority is. I would say authority is the privilege to exercise power. As a human, I have no more inherent power now as a vice president of Intel than I had as a student at the University of Idaho. I am just as powerful as, well, actually less so, because I probably have less strength as I get older. I have no more power. The power comes from the authority that has been delegated to me to exercise it. But we all sometimes get mixed up on that, because we want to go chase after these positions of authority because we think of them as power. Yes, it is a privilege to exercise power. It's not power in and of itself. And if we think of it as privilege, as a delegated privilege, then suddenly it becomes a little easier to recognize that maybe I'm no better just because I have a position of authority. But I'll get to that in a second. The second thing I want us to see is that there are spheres of authority. And this is really important, because in the authority model, if somebody who holds authority tries to exercise that authority outside the sphere, bad things can happen. So I would argue there are 4 spheres of authority. There's the sphere of government, or civic realm, the civic realm of authority. Those who are governing a country, governing a city, governing a county, whatever it is that they're governing. There's the sphere of the workplace, or the business realm. There's the sphere of home, or the personal realm. And then there's the sphere of church, or the spiritual realm. And those aren't necessarily the same thing, but the church is much more associated with the spiritual realm. Somebody who has authority in one is not necessarily somebody who is going to have authority in the other. And quite often, I think this country gets confused by that, because we put sports stars on television advertisements telling us what toothpaste to use. That particular sports star had no more authority over what toothpaste I should use than anybody else. Does he have somewhat authority to tell me how to play sports? Yeah, he's earned that. But he sure doesn't know anything about toothpaste. But we sometimes give them that because we get confused about how this whole structure ought to work. And of course, our society doesn't help this much. There's also a flow of authority. Authority is not something that just happens. It originates from a source of power. If it is indeed the privilege to exercise power, then there must be a source of power. And authority, being the privilege to exercise power, is then a delegated privilege. So whoever is the source of that power, or whatever is the source of that power, delegates that privilege to exercise it, and it goes from there. Therefore, that's why we hear, I am a man under authority and a man in authority. I have somebody over me in authority, and I am over others in authority. The person that is over me in authority has given me a certain scope of authority. I now delegate that to those that I need to delegate the authority to get the work done, or whatever it is. And this actually is true in all cases. You can look at it in terms of the civic realm. Obviously, our authority to pass laws is with Congress. That authority to the states is delegated the way that our Constitution is set up to the states. Passing laws is not delegated beyond that. Policemen can't pass laws, but they have the delegated authority to enforce laws. They can't interpret laws. That's for the judges to do. And that is a delegated authority from the Supreme Court. And you can see that every step of the way. In business, our chief executive officer has the authority to delegate all of the elements necessary to make the business successful. In my case, the authority that's been delegated to me is the authority over the technical operations of the sales and marketing group. I then have a staff of people, and I have to delegate my authority for the elements of that I have to delegate to get that done. Authority has this flow. You can think of it from top to bottom, from the source of power to the folks who actually have to exercise it. And that's always going to be the case. And when you get outside of that authority structure, bad things can happen. The fourth thing I want us to see about this authority model is what I call the despotism of authority. I mentioned earlier, authority has a scope. When I give you authority, in fact, in the Bible, which is my favorite book, and what I always love to use is the guideline for life, because I believe it has the most wisdom about how to look at life, because I believe that wisdom came from somebody who had much greater power than anybody I've ever met. Whenever you see God's Son talking about authority, he is giving authority, but it is a very specific authority. He sent what he called his disciples. He had this group of men who followed him. He called them his disciples. He sent them out. And when he sent them out, he gave them authority to do what? To cure disease. He didn't give them authority to go run business, or he didn't give them authority to go tell civic leaders how to run their city. He gave them authority to heal disease. If they had tried to take that power that they now had the privilege to exercise outside of that, they would have been stepping outside of the structure that had been set up, and bad things would have happened. Despotism is a working definition of despotism is the exercise of authority outside the scope given. When you're given a scope of authority, if you try to exercise it outside your scope, that is the despotism of authority. That's why we see dictators getting themselves into a situation where they are considered despots, because they really are abusing authority. They're exercising it both in unrighteous ways and in areas that they should not be exercising that authority. Okay, so now let me talk about the controversial part. What should our response to authority be? Given all of everything I just said, what should our response be? I'm going to give you a couple of specific examples. Our response to those in authority. To those in authority in government, what should our response be? Well, there's a couple of ways to look at this. There's the practical way, which I grew up thinking about, which is if I get pulled over and the man who pulls me over comes up to my car and he's wearing a big gun on his belt, perhaps I should listen to him. That's the practical. He's been delegated the authority, the privilege to exercise the power associated with that firearm. There's a lot of other power associated with what a policeman does, but that's a practical. Maybe I should show a little respect here. Not to mention, if I do, maybe he'll be nicer to me and maybe even not give me a ticket, as opposed to the other way, which usually will cause him to pull out his book and write every ticket he can think of. So practically, we should respect those in authority. In The spiritual realm, God has given us very clear instructions on this. And we may not like it, but it doesn't matter whether we like it or not. The Word is very clear. Let me read it to you. This is out of 1 Peter. Submit yourself for the Lord's sake to every authority instituted among men. Anybody hear any wishy-washiness in that? Submit yourself to every authority instituted among men. And then he goes on to talk about why. He's very clear. God has put these people in authority. They're accountable to Him, not you. So He gets to deal with them. In the workplace, same answer. If the structure is to work, we have to respect and submit to those in authority in our life, and we have to basically fall in line with. Now let me also talk a little bit about what submit really means here. Submit doesn't mean be a slave to. Submit doesn't mean whatever they say, I simply do without question. Submit means come into alignment with. And coming into alignment with means you have to understand it and you also get a chance to discuss it, but at the end of the day, when the decision's made, you take it on as if it's your decision. That's what submit means. And in the workplace, you need to think of it in the same way. What about as those in authority? That's actually a little bit of a more scary issue because, as I mentioned, if God has put you in authority, guess who you're answering to at the end of the day? If you are abusing your position of authority, if you are stepping outside of your position of authority, you get to answer to the ultimate authority, and that's not going to be pretty. Guaranteed. So, in the workplace, how shall I behave as somebody in authority? Let me go back to my favorite book and tell you what I believe the words, the guideline is. It's this. You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. The answer is very simple. If you have a position of authority in the workplace, recognize your job is to serve those who are under your authority. It's that simple. If you go into it thinking that your job as a manager is to lord it over those under authority, then you are not thinking the way that authority was set up. You are to serve those who report to you. What do I mean by that? Well, for example, if somebody working for you needs something that's either hard or impossible for them to get, you need to go get it. Whether it's a resource, whether it's an agreement with somebody else outside of your group, whatever it is, that's your job. You need to serve them as in do what they need, give them what they need so that they can be successful in the areas you have given them. The other thing is you have to delegate your authority to them in such a way they can be successful. Because if you ask them to be responsible for something without giving them the authority necessary, that's called culpability. You're asking them to be the throat to choke when something goes wrong without the ability, without the authority to make it happen. You have to do both. You have to serve them by delegating your authority to them, and you have to get them what they need to be successful. And if you think about managing in any other way, I would submit to you, you need to realign your thinking about it. The other point is, as an employee, which manager would you prefer to work for? The one who thinks of him or herself as somebody who needs to serve you or lord it over you? We all know the answer to that. It makes you a more beloved manager, believe me. At home, how am I to exercise authority at home? Yes, as a husband, I am in authority. As a father, I am in authority. How am I to exercise that authority? What does the Word say? The guideline for life. It says, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church. How did He love the church? He was crucified for it. Man, if I got to do that for my wife, I don't know if I'm ready for that. Ooh. But that's the level of serving that we're supposed to do for our wives, men. It's right there in black and white. May not be fun, but that's the way it is. Which husband would you rather be married to? One who has that idea of authority, or one who has the idea of authority that says, you must submit to me, therefore cook my dinner now. And if you burn it, you're in trouble. Well, we all know the answer to that. And then in the church. In the church, same thing. We are to submit to our leaders. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. We need to recognize God's authority flows through leaders. He has set up a structure of leaders. Yes, there are different ideas of how that structure ought to be. Some believe that it's elder-based. Some believe that it's just a single pastor. To me, I've done enough looking at this. I don't believe that there is a clear statement anywhere of that. What is clear is that there are leaders, there are elders, there are folks who are going to be overseers. They're the ones who not only have the authority, but they're the ones who are going to have the accountability for what happens. They're the ones who have to answer for it. Okay, well, what does that mean? What do I have to be like if I want to be one of those in authority in the church? Here's a trustworthy saying. If anyone sets his heart on being an overseer, he desires a noble task. That's good. Now, the overseer must be above reproach, the husband of but one wife, temperate, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not given to drunkenness, not violent but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own family well and see that his children obey him. Does anybody feel like they qualify? That's what you're supposed to do if you want to be in authority in the spiritual realm. Because that's the way it was set. So I have 5 suggestions for you. These are suggestions for how, in Intel speak, this is what we would call ARs. These are your actions required. Okay? Number 1, because I think that this will help you to think about how to approach this moving forward. Be intentional about your allegiances. Recognize that authority structures are set up. If I want to accept the gift of citizenship that the United States of America has offered me, accepting that gift means I am buying into the authority structure here. It means I will respect the policeman who pulls me over. It means I will respect my senator. Now, I may not vote for him or her, but I will respect that position once that person owns it. The military has a really good saying for this, and that is, salute, what's the term? Salute the, not the badge, but salute the rank, not the man. Same thing, right? Respect the position even if you don't respect the person. Because the position is the position of authority. So I'm buying into that authority structure, and I may not like the president we just elected, but that person is still our president. I've bought into that because I agreed to accept that gift of citizenship. If I'm going to accept employment with a company, I'm buying into the authority structure they have set up. That means the manager that I've chosen to work for, I'm going to respect as a manager. I may not respect as a person, but I will respect him or her as a manager. Declare your allegiances. I'm declaring allegiance to the authority structure of the United States. I'm going to declare allegiance to the authority structure of Intel. Declare it and be intentional about it. Because then you know who the people are who are in authority in your life. Number 2, submit to those who are in authority in your life. Come into alignment with them. Recognize they have that position of authority. Recognize they're not perfect. You maybe could do it better. That's irrelevant. Submit. Come into alignment. If you want things changed, change them within the authority structure. Don't step outside of the authority structure to do it. Number 3, be a servant to those under your authority. Get that mindset. Change your mindset now. Figure out what that means and go start doing it. Number 4, stay inside the scope of your authority. Don't step outside. If you do, bad things will happen. Number 5, delegate your authority responsibly, which means make sure you are intentional about delegating it and that you do delegate it, but you delegate it to those you know are ready for it. Don't set up your own little tin pot dictators, because now you are delegating your authority irresponsibly. Delegate your authority to somebody who is prepared for it. So that's my 20-minute or so talk on authority. Any questions?
I have a question. It's always, I understand the concept of submitting to authority. Assume I'm a German foot soldier in World War II. Can't get out of the service in the military. My officer orders me to exterminate the Jews. What do I do?
That's a nice easy one, Dan.
Yeah, well, and there's always the challenging ones, and I would answer it the way Peter answered it, which is, I must obey God, not men. You also have to recognize that there are some authorities that are greater than others. There is one ultimate power, and when what I hear from the ultimate power is different from what I'm hearing within the structure that I'm in, I have to recognize that these people are moving outside of that authority structure, and in some cases I may need to sacrifice my life to pay attention to the authority structure that I really fall under in this case. So in that particular case, I would follow Peter's example. I must obey God, not men, because that's my greater authority in that case. That's his authority, not Hitler's. So Hitler attempted to step way outside of his authority scope. The fact that he may have life and death power over me is nowhere near as important as somebody has immortal power over me. I think I'll choose the one that has the greater power.
Do you have any book titles you can suggest on this topic?
You know what I do, and do we have a way to like post that on the web if I give you a couple of book titles?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, so I will go send them to him, and we'll get that up on the website, because I do have a few.
If you feel strongly that a change in authority would be beneficial or necessary, what's the best way to bring that about as far as lines of communication? Or if you are in line, if you've submitted, but you are concerned about the effect that might have on you or others, how do you suggest going forward with change?
Yeah. So two things. Number one, so this is the hard question, which is, I really fundamentally disagree with what's going on here. I believe that there's change needed. I'm going to pay attention to this issue of authority, but I've got to go focus on how we get change done. How do you do it? And I would say that once again we have a model. Number one, we need to stay inside of the authority structure. If you step outside of it, things will go bad. But number two, once again, we have a guideline for that. And the guideline is given for leaders in the church, but it is just as applicable, and that is, go to the person in authority who can change. If that person refuses, bring another person. Go to that person. If that person still refuses, then you bring more. In other words, you basically, if it's something that is needed change, you first go take it on yourself, then you bring in others, and then you bring in more. And that, by the way, is a very good example. If you think about how we do it in the U.S. today with protest marches and that sort of thing, we do follow that approach.
It typically takes more time, but it's a better route to go.
Yes, right. Because think about what a country is that doesn't have authority. It's anarchy. And quite often, when you've created a new country through rebellion, what you end up with is either a boss who's same as the old boss or worse. The way to do this in a righteous way that is actually going to have a positive effect is within the authority structure. Yes, you have to be more patient. And I realize for you Gen Xers, that's difficult. Even worse for you Gen Yers. But you have to be more patient. You have to do this in a way that ends up with a solution that can work, rather than a solution that just creates change, and ultimately change probably not for the best. Now, did I see one more hand up here? Okay, one more.
I was going to ask if you have conflict between two authority figures kind of on the same issue, and you're delegated to from two authority figures. What are your suggestions?
Shades of gray. This is where you really start getting into the challenges, right? The model there is, determine two things: where the greater authority is, especially in this area, and number two, who appears to be stepping outside of the realm of their authority, and then go work within the structure to deal with that. It's not always easy, and again, that's why I, as an Intel manager, spend so much of my time dealing with roles and responsibilities, because people end up with these shades of gray of more than one person trying to exercise this authority. Who's the right person? Who do I really need to work with? At the end of the day, as a good manager, as somebody in authority, you will fix that problem right up front. You will set that very clearly. And it may seem to be fairly tedious to spend time up front dealing with roles and responsibilities, but it is the righteous way to do it. If you are under authority in that situation, you need to go to those who are causing those shades of gray, and you need to just insist that they get this clear. Choosing is usually not the best answer. Sometimes that's the only way, but it's usually you want to try to get it clear, and especially if you see some people who are stepping outside of the scope of their authority. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, Dan.